At 7:10 local time, a Tomahawk missile erupts from the deck of the USS Spruance. A turbofan, roughly the diameter of a manhole cover, spools to life, pushing the missile into its low-altitude sprint. 4 seconds later, the next cell fires. While the missiles are still over open water, the regime in Tehran is about to experience the most expensive morning in its history. At 9:45, the first concussion slams into Pasteur Street. This isn't a warning, it's a decapitation. The strike hits the regime's command core before the first siren even sounds, turning a standard escalation into a total system failure. Then another blast lands deeper inside the compound network. Windows bow outward, car alarms start screaming. Dust punches into the air around the core of the regime's command zone. And before the smoke even begins to settle, more impacts are already hitting Kermanshah, Tabriz, Lorestan, and coastal targets further south. The opening strike is not a warning, it is a beheading attempt. Reports that follow say Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is hit in the first wave, along with other senior regime figures. And in the first minutes of the operation, the entire war tilts from escalation to decapitation. While the smoke is still rising over the capital, the real big mistake is unfolding 600 miles away on the coast. Before a single Tomahawk hits a pier, the US sends in the Ghosts, the Lucas drones, low-cost systems manufactured in Arizona and reverse-engineered from captured Shahed 136, is doing something no American weapon has ever done. An Iranian air defense operator at a Bavar 373 battery watches a dozen slow-moving contacts materialize on his scope and does the only thing his training allows. He fires. A $1 million interceptor screams off the rail, closing at Mach 3 to vaporize a piece of plastic and wire that costs less than a used jet ski. This is the brutal math of cost exchange warfare. Every time an Iranian battery fires a $1 million interceptor at a drone cheaper than a used Ford F-150, the math gets worse for Tehran. Tehran is about to learn exactly where the trillions in the Pentagon's black budget actually go. And it keeps getting worse for the defender. Every time the battery fires, it broadcasts its exact position to the passive sensors of F-35s already crossing the border. Far to the west, the packages are already committed. Israeli aircraft are moving east in layers. US strike assets are already in the air or on the way. Cruise missiles are inbound from the sea. The attack does not come in darkness. It comes in daylight, with ministries staffed, radios active, roads crowded, command bunkers manned, and decision makers still upright at their desks. A night raid hunts sleeping targets. A daylight raid hunts a state in mid-breath. Over western Iraq, the first Israeli spear point is thin, quiet, and almost invisible. F-35Is go first, pulling the route open toward the densest slices of Iranian airspace. They move ahead of the larger formations, low observable, data-linked, reading emitters before emitters fully understand they are being read. Behind them come heavier waves, F-15Is carrying long-range standoff weapons, strike fighters loaded for fixed targets, support aircraft feeding the picture backward through the network. Later, Israel describes it as the largest sortie in its history. Around 200 fighters, hundreds of targets, multiple provinces. But in the opening hour, the scale is not counted in headlines. It is counted in spacing, timing, and geometry. Aircraft keep pouring through the same broken seam before Iran can stitch the sky back together. Inside one F-35I cockpit, the display is calm, even when the body is not. Symbology glows, threat rings creep across the screen. The pilot watches the route slide under the nose and sees the target area build on the sensor picture. Hard edges, warm signatures, known structures. One air defense node still alive somewhere ahead. No chatter, no wasted movement, just the faint hum of systems, the tight pressure of the mask, and the occasional change in tone as the aircraft's electronic warning gear samples the battle space. A radar spikes for a moment, then disappears. A weapons cue flashes, Bay doors open and close in seconds. The jet barely seems to move at all. Far below, an air defense site near the approach corridor erupts into fire and dust, and the path toward Tehran gets wider. At sea, the American half of the first punch is already lifting out of steel tubes. In the Combat Information Center of a US destroyer, the room is cold, dim, and washed in screen glow. Tracks crawl across consoles. The ship's launch sequence runs with machine precision. Then the first Tomahawk leaves. The deck above shudders. Then another. Then another. On the displays, the missiles arc away and settle into their programmed routes, skimming low over water before turning toward coastal radar gaps, naval facilities, command posts, drone sites, and missile support infrastructure. The operators watch the salvo stretch out into the distance, knowing the targets ahead are not symbolic, they are practical. Piers, batteries, comms nodes, control sites, the things that let Iran answer fast with boats, missiles, drones, and anti-ship fire. 25 Tomahawks are currently ghosting through the valleys of the coastline, exploiting every blind spot and radar shadow in the Iranian network. Destination: the IRGC fast attack piers at Bandar Abbas. In 39 minutes, that fleet ceases to exist. The sea goes dark between launches. Then another cell ignites. Over Tehran, the first impacts are now spreading across the regime's nervous system. Leadership compounds, security headquarters, ministry buildings, sites linked to the state's command apparatus. Structures tied to the machinery that keeps Iran's internal control intact. This is not just about killing individuals. It is about hitting the rooms, cables, relays, courtyards, bunkers, and secure offices that allow orders to form and travel. The effect is immediate. Some units receive fragmentary instructions. Some receive none. Some get duplicate messages from different channels. Some get silence. In western Iran, air defense crews start seeing too much and too little at the same time. Radars wake up across Kermanshah and the mountain belt. Screens fill with clutter, partial returns, tracks that appear, vanish, and reappear in places they should not. One battery commander has seconds to choose. Radiate and risk immediate detection. Stay dark and let the strike stream deeper into the country. Fire early and spend missiles on bad geometry. Wait too long and die under suppression. Some batteries choose to radiate. For a few seconds, their picture improves. Then, the kill chain snaps shut on them. Israeli stealth aircraft and supporting systems fix the emission. Standoff weapons or follow-on strikers roll in. A radar vehicle burns on one hillside. A launcher farther south tries to displace and catches fragments while still turning onto the road. The first day is full of moments like that. Brief flashes of resistance, then impact, smoke, blackout. And then the heavy American strike crosses the line. AB-2 has been flying for so long that time inside the cockpit no longer feels connected to the day below. The bomber slips forward under strict discipline, the crew moving through quiet checklists with the kind of control that only comes from repetition and enormous stakes. The target is buried, not a parade ground symbol, not a television building, a hardened underground missile facility built to survive exactly this kind of day. Bomb bay doors open, weapons release. The aircraft hardly seems to react. Seconds later, far below, precision munitions drive into hardened access points and support structures tied to Iran's ballistic missile architecture. Concrete jumps, earth folds upward, dust climbs from tunnel mouths and support areas around the buried complex. The objective is simple: smash the places where the missiles hide before they can rise toward Israel or US bases across the region. While the B-2s handle the heavy lifting, F-22 Raptors are loitering overhead, completely invisible. They aren't just hunting, they're listening. They're vacuuming up every radio transmission and radar ping, feeding that data directly to F-15 E-Strike Eagles waiting in the wings. By the time an Iranian missile crew gets their launcher upright, they've already been targeted for 10 minutes. Across Kermanshah province, that becomes the central race of the first 24 hours. Iran's launchers are mobile, their ecosystem is not. Missile fields around Imam Ali and other Western sites become immediate priorities. Launch pads, tunnel entrances, fueling areas, command trucks, maintenance shelters, support vehicles, local air defences. The strike packages do not just go after the launcher, they go after the ground around the launcher, the road feeding it, the radar protecting it, and the officer trying to push the launch order through whatever comms still work. One F-15I Wave comes in heavier and louder than the stealth packages before it. The aircraft are carrying the kind of ordnance meant to break fixed military infrastructure fast. As they approach the release line, the cockpit warning receiver starts to chirp again. Not a constant scream, just sharp, needling spikes. A surviving Iranian search radar is trying to see through the wreckage of the morning. The crews stay on profile, target coordinates lock, release cues count down, weapons come off clean. The fighters bank away as black columns begin to rise from the missile support area below, and a delayed secondary blast rolls through the valley as something stored on site cooks off hard. Along the coast, the naval war starts before fleets ever close on each other. Bandar Abbas takes hits, Konarak takes hits. Other coastal facilities come under fire as cruise missiles and follow-on strikes work down the shoreline. Piers, support buildings, naval compounds, and vessels inside the port infrastructure start burning. The logic does not need to be explained to anyone watching the imagery. Fast attack craft cannot swarm if piers are burning. Anti-ship batteries cannot coordinate cleanly if coastal command blinks are broken. Naval headquarters cannot direct a rapid answer if their own screens have gone dark under blast and cyber disruption. In infrared imagery, some of the damage looks almost clinical. Hot white shapes where vessels are burning at the dock. Rectangles of heat where buildings are still on fire. Thin lines of secondary flame along the waterfront. Back in Tehran, the regime is now fighting for coherence. The broadcasting authority becomes part of the target set. Ministry buildings and command-linked compounds are already damaged or under repeated attack. Communications are under pressure. Cyber attacks slam into websites, apps, and pieces of the civilian information environment. Phone-based tools begin failing. Networks wobble. Connectivity drops. The state is not fully blind, but parts of it are now seeing through smoke, broken glass, disrupted circuits, and contradictory reports. That is enough. A nervous system does not need to be annihilated to fail. It only needs to hesitate while the next strike arrives. Northwest of the capital, Iran tries to make old airframes matter. At Tabriz, ground crews rush around fighters that belong to another era, but can still create danger if they get airborne at the right moment. F-4s, F-5s, legacy jets that are no match for the aircraft coming for them, but that can still complicate routes, force reactions, or drag support aircraft into less comfortable geometry. Some are hit before they can do much with the runway in front of them. Others are caught in the broader collapse of the local air picture. The attempt itself shows what the day is becoming. Iran is not trying to win the sky, it is trying to make the sky costlier. The Israeli tempo never slows enough for recovery. That is what makes the first day feel less like one raid and more like machinery. A stealth package opens a lane. A standoff package hammers a fixed target. A follow-on wave hits what survives. Then another wave forms before repair crews can even move. Smoke from Tehran starts mixing with smoke from Western Missile Country and the southern coast. Separate target sets begin to merge into one continuous battle space. From orbit, from cockpit screens, from the deck cameras of ships in the Gulf, the country starts to look like a network of impacts chasing each other across distance. By midday, the retaliation has already begun. Missiles and drones start launching toward Israel. Regional alerts begin spreading. Pressure starts building on US positions in the broader theatre. For the pilots cycling through tanker tracks west of Iran, that knowledge is present in every return leg and every turnaround. Every launcher that survives the morning is now a problem with minutes attached to it. Every drone site still intact is another wave that can lift after dark. Every command node left standing is another path for retaliation to keep flowing. Over the tanker orbits, the rhythm turns brutal and repetitive. A fighter plugs in, takes fuel, drops off the boom, turns east again. Another arrives. Under one boom, an F-35I tops off after a run toward Tehran. Through the canopy, the pilot can see faint contrails further west, where defensive interceptors are climbing to meet retaliatory tracks headed for Israel. Under another, a heavier strike jet takes on fuel before heading back toward western Iran with more guided weapons for missile support sites and surviving radars. Nobody lingers. Nobody wastes motion. The first day runs on generation rate. Sortie after sortie. Refuel, rearm, turn, go back in. Iran adapts where it can. Some SAM batteries stop behaving like a network and start behaving like traps. A radar comes alive for 3 seconds from a new location. Another emits from near damaged terrain, using the clutter of burning sites as cover. A battery commander outside a shattered support area orders a brief radiate, gets one rough track, then kills the signal before a weapon can ride it home. Another crew decides not to radiate at all, waiting instead for passive cues, visual confirmation, or the hope of a target drifting into a narrow engagement window. Suppression is not the same as absence. A broken network can still kill. One Israeli formation pushing back towards central Iran sees it happen in real time. A warning tone spikes in the cockpit, then another. A missile launch flashes from the ground as a bright point under the haze, climbing hard off a surviving battery that has chosen to reveal itself. Defensive systems respond. The formation breaks just enough to survive, not enough to lose the strike timeline. Seconds later, the launcher's position is marked, shared, and fed backward into the machine. The battery has bought itself a few moments of relevance. Then the next wave comes for it. By late day, the coast is still burning, the western missile belt is still under pressure, and Tehran is still taking damage. The leadership district is shattered. Key regime sites are dark or damaged. Broadcast-linked infrastructure is under pressure. Command and control is disrupted. Missile fields are being hunted in layers. Naval bases are smoking. Air defenses are degraded but not gone. And the pilots, ship crews and missile teams on both sides are now inside the most dangerous phase of the opening day, when surprise has faded but momentum has not. In the CIC of the US destroyer, operators watch the coastal picture keep changing. Burning sites disappear from one layer of the display and reappear on another as new reports come in. There are still returns near the shoreline, still movement, still the possibility of surviving batteries, surviving boats, surviving launch cells. Another stack of strike coordination data rolls across the consoles. The ship is still in it. The first salvos were only the beginning. Over western Iran, more aircraft are already inbound. One new Israeli wave is forming for another push east. Long-range American strike assets remain in the loop. Iranian missile crews are still trying to get launchers upright before another sensor finds them. In valleys below, surviving transporters are moving under camouflage, smoke, and broken comms, trying to stay ahead of a kill chain that keeps tightening. Along the coast, black water reflects fire from damaged naval infrastructure. Over Israel, defensive intercepts are still rising against retaliatory tracks. In Tehran, smoke hangs over ministries, compounds, and shattered blocks of the regime's command core. Then, just as the clock pushes toward the end of the first 24 hours, several surviving mobile radars in western Iran begin blinking back to life in short, dangerous bursts. And above the tanker tracks, fighters peel off the booms, one by one, noses turning east, while somewhere ahead in the dark, another cluster of missiles starts to rise.